All right, we are back for another episode. Last week's episode, you might have noticed, got a little weird at the end because we cut ourselves off. So we're going to come back to that question. Our audio failed us, but we're back in action this week to answer the question we were going to answer last week, and then to kind of keep on the trend a little bit of talking about, the assessments and just some things. Obviously, right now, I think at the end of this, we're going to have assessed 100 and, well, I guess more than that. I'm not even thinking of UNO. So 150 pitchers, college pitchers, something like that. So it's on our brain first and foremost. So, obviously we're kind of really in this world. And so it just makes sense for us to be talking about it. So we were talking about some of the trends or reoccurring, I guess, themes that we're seeing as we go, not necessarily in what kids are doing or throwing or how they're rotating or patterns or things like that. We might get to that at some point, but just in overall approach, we talked obviously last week a little bit about freshmen and some of the things we saw there, but I think all of us had some version of conversation around the topic of pitch labels. So this can go in a variety of ways, but pitch labels are something, it's very interesting to me. I actually just watched I was like, I don't know, baseball has this issue. But I watched a Driveline clip where they showed that people that come in with a changeup that actually spins like a slider, and they have this conversation of that. So it may be similar to our conversation, except that you can say it spins like this versus this is maybe slightly more educated than our world is right now. But basically the concept is, we have varying levels of athletes that have, I would say the range is 3. I just downloaded or uploaded a picture that we just assessed with 3 pitches. That's the minimum, I think. So 3 to 9 pitch labels we've seen so far in the assessment. And so there's a lot of concepts around that of okay, when we assess that, first and foremost, do those pitches live on their own? Do they actually have break that is separate from other pitches? That's sort of one question that you could ask. There's how do you use that pitch? Do we take it away if it doesn't? If it looks the same as another pitch, do we take one of them away? Do we not have them throw? And then there's a concept of growing off that pitch or trying to change what that pitch's profile looks like. I think even more than that, there's this concept, and Ashley, you can get into this a little bit, of okay, if my drop ball is bullet, right? So I have this label of a pitch, I have drop ball and it's bullet, or I have a label, probably even more common, I have a label rise ball and it's bullet. We have some hesitation, I think, of our athletes seeing that information because we feel like it's going to be upsetting to them that their pitch doesn't do what they think it does. And what we have talked about is that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And so this conversation between what is the break profile, what does the pitch do, and then the label can be what it is. So that's a lot, but that's the general conversation. So I'll start with you, Ashley, of just what are some things you're seeing around this concept and how you've been addressing it, and whether it's assessments, consulting calls, all of that.
Yeah, I think the concept of pitch label, it's interesting because I honestly, in however many we've completed so far from a debrief standpoint, have only a few times said omit the following pitch or pitches. Only a few. I mean, and because those are the pitches where it's legitimately not adding anything, either in a speed differential, in something not only unique, but it's not adding anything. So let me give you an example. Sometimes someone will throw a curve and a screw, or a rise and a screw, and they're identical. You could say, oh, get rid of one. But basically, they might feel like, oh, yeah, it's the same pitch, but the intent of screw helps me angle it inside. And I think what's often...
And their body might be different.
I
think sometimes we're
yeah, the underhand slot typically gives us access to glove side run. And so that's something that is, we are mostly seeing pitchers who create horizontal break to the glove side. If they have a horizontal neutral pitch, that can be really powerful because then it's usually, okay, we can throw it to both sides of the plate. But that's not as common. I'm usually seeing most pitches have this horizontal break to their glove side. And so when that's the case, yes, the screwball might not be adding anything different than what some of your other labels were called, But because of how you angle it, it actually gives you a tool to the arm side, even though the break isn't to the arm side. So I would argue that is adding to the profile, right? And so sometimes I've even said, like, I was thinking of this the other day because I'm like, when data started like coming about, I feel like one, it was across the board. We would be like, bullet means it's
bad,
terrible, you know, like everything's terrible if it has bullet, which is obviously not true. I shouldn't say obviously, which is not true. And then we're like, and screwballs don't break. Like, wah, we all were fools and we didn't know what we were talking about. But it's like, actually, first of all, screwballs are like any other pitch. Sometimes they're bullet, sometimes they're backspin, sometimes they're topspin. Like, they could be anything. What we're saying is they don't break, is that most of them, all of them essentially, they don't have horizontal break in. They're being angled in. But that doesn't mean that no one should throw screwball. The concept of angling in, our underhand slot, how we have to turn around the ball, typically gives us that glove side. We often need a pitch like that, you know? And so I think it's just like, you know, it's important to understand the pitches in the full context. And so are there times where I'd say like, oh, I don't think this screwball's really adding anything?
Or is it feeding her patterns in a way that's not?
Yeah, exactly. She's super excessive in rotation and that's only going to like blow things up. But I think that's the biggest thing. I very rarely, I guess an example, I just did a debrief not too long ago. An example, I was like, omit the rise because the screw was bullet, like a -1. I call that bullet. And the rise was like -2.5. Lower velocity athlete, like 60 max. So the rise was like 58 at like a -2. What we often see is that the rise, not always, there is no always, but what we often see is that because the intent to elevate the rise, they stay on the ball longer. This isn't like now the ball is breaking or jumping, whether it's bullet or, you know, -2.5. They stay on the ball longer to get it to go there, which then pulls their fingers behind the ball. So there's actually more downspin. So it's like, let's not elevate a pitch. So, you know, like if she were to throw rise ball as a curve, if that makes sense, a curve concept through the zone, glove side, maybe she could hold bullet on that pitch and actually that would be really good because all she has is a drop ball, like a mediocre drop ball. So it's like that could be good. So transform the label in order to transform the intent. But I think most of the time what we're really looking at is what are our tools? Do we have a strength? Do we have complements to it? Do we have changes of speed to it? Like what are we looking at? And then do we have tools on both sides of the plate or are we pretty limited? And if we only have tools on one side of the plate, it's like, how can a different pitch name, you know, I'm the first one to be like, that's the rising, screwing, curving drop or something, you know, but like call something, whatever, to be able to just like shove a pitch to the opposite side of the plate, you know, because that's sometimes the only way that you can get something there is to actually angle it. So I think pitch labels it's complicated. And I also think it sometimes gets this bad reputation. Like, you know, I have honestly seen, it's like shocked me. I have to go look. I think there was a pitcher a couple of weeks ago. I think she had 7 pitch types and she was a freshman. So of course I'm like, you know, Judgy Judgerson over here, like definitely going to tell her that half of these are garbage. And every single one of them provided something unique. I was like blown away. I just kept saying in the debrief, like the debrief was like 3 times as long as usual because I just kept saying, I've never seen this before. It's just so awesome. I've never seen it. And so when I had a consulting call with that coach, is like, I told the head coach, like Ashley just kept saying how unique this was. I'm like, it really is. It's because she had some that were like no horizontal break and some pitches that had glove side. So she had these like equal pitches that kind of hugged the y-axis, those that didn't. And then she had 3 tiers of velocity. So it was like every pitch either served as the arm side pitch, whether it was bullet or backspin. It was like either the arm side version of it versus the glove side version of it, the hard version of it, the off speed or the slow. It was so unique. And so like that would be an example of like all kinds of labels, but it was just her way of being able to basically, it's sides of the plate, spin profile, and change of speed. And that's what we're going for. And if the labels match that, and who cares, you know?
Right.
Who cares? I usually just recommend like know the families. I always talk about like the families of pitches. Like if that athlete legitimately has 7 pitches, don't like warm up one pitch, throw 100 of them, warm up the next. Like this pitch, this pitch,
spin for each of them. It's like, no.
Yeah, it's your hand position's the same. It's the same family, the same category. Right. So you've got like, yes, 7 unique spin like characteristics here, or like ball flight characteristics, but in reality you've got 3 like families or categories, and so just like warm them up in that group just for the sake of like workload. But I definitely think we get into the, and I was the first one like last week, like what do we see with the freshmen? There's a difference between what I just said and then seeing the freshmen who have 7 to 9 pitches and like none of them are unique, and then none of them are like doing something good or like great,
Right.
you know?
Well, and
like,
it's
that's a
like none
different
of them are
ballgame.
unique, and they have no idea of that.
Right.
And so, and they have no idea what they think. And I think some of the trends we see is like, okay, I think one of 2 things. We'll see people say like, it just didn't break that day, which is not, that doesn't happen. It might break a little less, but it doesn't.
That's what I say. They're like, that wasn't good that day. I'm like, don't worry about it. Thumbs
And
up.
then that they also think like they're going to go get that pitch.
Right.
And it's like, instead of this sort of freeing understanding that like, maybe there are pitches, right? So we see like, there's a freshman, very good. She threw 6 pitches, I think. And most of them just had elite horizontal run above this sort of glove side that we're used to seeing, which is unique. We don't see, I would say probably more unique than vertical. I don't know if it works better, irrelevant, but we don't see it very much, especially at the velocities this kid throws it. And her rise and her curve and her drop and her fast, they all did that. They all had very little vertical and a lot of horizontal. But on one pitch, there were a couple times where she got some backspin on screwball, I think. And so that's something that obviously, like, I'm just collecting data, but I assume that we're going to see, I've been around these enough, that like maybe she can access some backspin with the right intent, and maybe it's screwball intent for whatever reason.
Block.
Yeah.
I've been around this pitching block a time or 2 at this point.
I've been just, and so that's cool. It's showing the signs that maybe she could grow something off of that horizontal run, which is interesting. And that would be it. That's what she throws. And it's great. And I think it's like the idea of this is a bad thing. It's like, I think if we could all just frame it as this is not a bad thing. We know what you do. So what does it mean? Okay, and your rise just goes 5 glove side. It doesn't even mean we might take that away. It doesn't mean we might not throw it in that location because it's like a back door. It's pretty weird. But you better not throw that over the plate. Like, there are some things that you need to know about what that pitch ultimately is doing and where it's going on their barrel that are, that are not going to be, that you need to know about yourself. So it's only going to make you more effective. We're not going to chase down. Like, I think it's probably very unlikely. I didn't look at every detail of that kid is going to access down given what she's showing, 0 vertical and sometimes backspin and horizontal. She probably doesn't have access at this point to down. So like, there's some freeing and like, let's not chase all the things. You're really freaking good in this version. Let's get velo up even more. This is because a freshman. So like, she's already throwing above average velo. So imagine we get some fatigue off of her and all that. She's going to throw harder, and she's going to throw these, this version of herself. I also think when you understand pitch labels, it leads to a much more effective off speed almost always, because you understand what the hell your pitches are doing. So it's like when we see kids who throw a random dropping the F word on this one, a random freaking
spicy
off speed.
Krista forgot we were recording.
Yes.
Please leave that in. That was good.
S2, we always mark explicit so people know. Anyways, when you're throwing a random freaking changeup that doesn't match anything, that lives in some, like, I think we screenshotted one where like the kid threw like all down here, and there was like literally it was like ridiculous. The changeup lived in some ridiculous, like we had to make the like graph bigger to get the changeup in. But I think most of that comes from that they don't know what they throw, and so there was no thought in having an off speed match the other things they throw. So I think you get more access to at least one better off speed, sometimes multiple better off speeds, because you can start to match different things that you throw in things. So I think my thoughts on this and what I'm seeing is like this fear that we have of showing the athlete, of telling the athlete, the fear that athletes have around kind of receiving this information, whatever it comes from. And to me, I just think like, it's not scary. It's good. It's a path to getting better. But also, a lot of times, for a lot of these athletes, it's a path to just being better right now because you understand what your stuff does better. And so I don't think it's scary. I think it's this idea of just like being able to be you if we frame it in the right way. But I think there's just such a misunderstanding of what any of it means, and a fear of like, if it doesn't match the label, then we're telling people it's bad, and that's not the case. Or like, if it doesn't match the label, then I should go try to get that by doing spins, which definitely is not what we're saying, because that doesn't usually work.
Well,
And there's just a misunderstanding around the concept. So I think it's just something we got to continue to grow, probably put out more content when we have a freaking minute about pitch direction and labels and things like that. But there's just, I agree. It's just kind of like there's a lot of layers to it. Of the kind of issues
I have a couple
with it.
comments. My first is, we're in this transition of, out of sheets and into app development. Some of the questions that come up from our data engineer is kind of, he doesn't know the data the way that we do. He's the implementer, he's the coder. And so I spent a lot of my time educating him on like, just what does this information mean, so he can put it into context. And oftentimes it'll come up of like, well, what's a pitch type of other? I was like, well, that could be a whole host of things. That could be a vector curve, that could be this, maybe this. So my comment of like data integrity is going to lead to a question I want to ask the two of you that I'll be curious to hear what your responses are. But the data integrity piece of like, when we say that a pitcher has we'll use rise ball as an example. We say a pitcher has a rise ball. This is what's been so tricky about any ball flight company publishing anything about norms and metrics on what these pitches actually do, is because we've done a backwards approach. Basically, we've said, okay, here's the label and this is what it's supposed to do, as opposed to this is what the pitch shape is, this is what it does, here's what we're going to call it. So my question is, it's twofold. One, does softball need to come to consensus on what pitch labels actually mean? What do they look like? What's the shape? What's the break? Whatever. And how do we get there? Given what we have right now in terms of all of these different, messes of labels and et cetera. So one, do we need it? And two, how do we get there?
I think yes.
I think no.
Oh, yeah. Disagreeing. Cool.
I used to think yes, and I switched. I think no. Because I think of like, we're so limited in our underhand slot. It's not apples to apples with baseball in the overhand slot, where we get to, I always do this. I'm like, I'm not in the screen, where we get to manipulate the hand all around the ball. We're so limited. Like, what I often want to show someone is like the difference between 0 and +3 is like 2 centimeters on where you are on the ball. I mean, it is such a small little window that we get to manipulate this giant ass ball with these small hands in this underhand slot. And so I think that just generally, the reason I say, I think I'd rather us just understand that the pitch label, like this, what you started with, Laura, is this concept of like a curve. Now, curve is tricky because curve, obviously, you're assuming like has horizontal. But instead of saying like a good curve is at 9 o'clock with a horizontal of X, like I think we should kind of like get away from attaching the labels to what's good. You can say what's good. You can say when something has backspin, these are the levels. We do that in our report. It starts to go from average, above average, and elite at these levels based in this velocity profile. You can definitely do that, and that should get stripped away from labels. But I still think, I think we really need the concept of intent in order to achieve different things. And I think I'm starting to see more and more that athletes have the different labels. That's what it's about for them, is intent. It's like when I call it curve, I get my hand to do this. When I call it rise, when I call it screw, whatever that looks like, I get it to do this. And I just think it's so small for pitchers to be able to make change and to tap into different concepts that sometimes intent is exactly what it takes to push it over the edge. And if you've ever been in a training session with a pitcher and they get something right and you ask them, what did you think about on that pitch? The shit that they say, you're like, what the hell? There's no chance I would have told you to do that. It is very, very rare that I see a pitcher tell me her intent matched what was real. very rare. And so I think I would be afraid if we were like, let's get rid of, we only have 4 things that we even call pitches in pitching. I think that we would see less break as a whole for pitchers. I just think they need this ability of like, I think I put my hand here, I do this, like an exaggerated version of what the hand needs to do to tap into anything, if that makes sense of what I'm getting at.
I think you answered a different question actually. So I don't.
I agree that I would have.
Because
damn, I thought we were going to get.
I think
that would have been fun for the audience.
Because I think there's 2 separate points here. I think you can have whatever labels you need for intent and training. I think that's separate from data integrity. I think from the data visualization and presentation purpose, if this in-game data starts getting shown, then you have to come to consensus because otherwise it will be nonsense. So I think like if you look at baseball stuff and you click slider at the MLB level, you're going to get pitches that generally they're not the same exactly, but generally fall into a certain characteristic. And then now this is a conversation we've had about like what hitters can look at. Now I can start to understand like, how does this hitter hit sliders? How do sliders match up against lefties? How does whatever, and that slider at that level from a data standpoint means something real. It means, I actually don't know pitch, so it means something. I don't know what sliders do, but it means something real. It means gyro, maybe. I think that might be what a slider does.
There's a general consensus in baseball, though, that a slider means
right.
X. It means that a pitch generally looks like this.
Right. Now, if underneath that, in order for someone to get a slider, they thought changeup, and that helped them or whatever, I think that's a separate thing. But in order for us at the data level to have a conversation, then I think like, yes, we need some consensus. And I don't think it's 4. I think there's a little bit more than that. And I think baseball, there was like this, it's called a sweeper, right? That's there's more pitches that they're coming now because people are realizing a little bit, and they don't have that much more than us in terms of probably general break directions. It's just that like a slider is fully gyro. What that means for them, because all the time they have for gravity and distance and the ball size, is that ends up with a bunch of trajectory break that's really helpful to them. We can't throw a version of that pitch. That's not the reason a bullet is good for us is the opposite. The reason a bullet is good for us is because it holds a line that's fast usually, and it whatever. But I think from a data integrity place, you got to start getting there, because I think right now it's just like, if we have people in the top level conversation that still think a curve has 9 o'clock spin direction, like we are having, that's not good. So I just think like, and so then underneath that, what people are trying to teach with curve is that, and that can have negative impact. Now, what Ashley, is that sometimes, for instance, like a kid that we just assessed had a 2-seam that she only threw outside. It was like a curve basically. And what it ended up it was her most down pitch, because we see that all the time. Like if someone has a curve and they have more time to get around it, just for the same reason you were just saying, sometimes they throw a lot down with it. And so if I think at the underlying level, you're like, think curve, think get around it, because that helps you have sink over there, whatever. But that's a drop ball. And I think from a data standpoint, we need to know that that's a drop ball. And maybe there will be a drop curve, because there's a difference between a drop that has horizontal run and a drop that doesn't. Like maybe there will be these pitches, but it's not a curve ball for the standpoint of us trying to understand what pitches are doing. So I think you were talking about intent and training, which I agree with you. Like people can think whatever the hell they want, and they might need to think rise. That kid that I just referenced that could throw backspin, probably to throw that is going to need to think screw, because her screw intent was what allowed her to access whatever she was accessing in that moment to get backspin. So whatever, you got to figure out then, like during screw, what are you thinking, so that we can tap into that, and that's how you're going to train that kid. And so that part was important. But from the top level of data, I think it's messy if we're just like, well, we don't have to come to consensus, because I think you're right, Laura. Like one of the GAs at one of the schools like pulled up that Rapsodo guideline for us, and this is not a knock on Rapsodo or anything. It's just, how can you do it right now? Yeah, people are labeling things insane, so they're trying to aggregate the data they have into calling like what's good, what's bad. But that's just based off the data they have, and pitch labels is complicated. So I think from a data standpoint, we need some consensus.
I think the merging of these two concepts is like, okay, you got your pitch comm. What are you calling, right? What is the coach calling from an intent standpoint? What is being labeled in Yakkertech in game, whatever it is? Like, could those two things be different? Absolutely.
Could, yeah, maybe.
You know what I mean? And so I think like it's not as simple. I keep hearing both of you, talk about those components. It's not as simple as just saying a rise has these things. It is, okay, her intent, what am I calling that for her? Which means that maybe, pitcher A's rise is not the same thing that happens when you call a rise for pitcher B, but are they both rises? You know what I mean? Like from a data standpoint and being able to bucket those things, I think it's a real challenge that we're going to have for the foreseeable future until we come to some consensus on what those pitch shapes, are sort of bucketed as. At least externally in the in-game data. I agree. I think internally though, like, what you're calling from an intent standpoint, your training intent. I mean, Ashley, you see this all the time. Like you have a kid just change their perspective of like, okay, throw this like your other pitch. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, it just birthed a brand new something. It's great. But then I always go back to, okay, then labeling that in Rapsodo, labeling that in your tech. It's like, shoot.
Especially in game data, especially in in-game data. Because I think it just gets messy. It's a conversation we had of like a hitter is like, I'm not a good rise hitter because her up and in heat map is not as good as the rest. But in reality, if we say, there's a pitch called gyro that we have no label for. Like I think that the first thing that we do is get a label for gyro, get a label for bullet. But we have that athlete that is a good rise ball pitcher if we're thinking rise as backspin and isn't a good bullet pitcher.
I know the name. Don't remember way back when Ashley Rogers, her bullet, she called it bagel because she called it bagel because it just like stayed like little
bagel.
No,
and bagel can be great.
No. The reason she called it a bagel is because it does everything.
Oh,
that was why.
No, it was bullet.
Bagel. Oh, I mean,
my
bullet.
Story's better, so maybe I changed
it.
Right,
fine. You can have that one. That's good.
My reason.
Actually, if you're listening, confirm or deny.
Yeah. I thought it was because it just like, but anyway, bagel would be good.
I was thinking about that when you're like 7 pitches. I'm like, and one of them's got to be a bagel. One of them's just got to be a bagel. I love it. I think it's a great.
That'd be a good name. I was just thinking about that tangent. Go ahead, Krista, but that'd be a good name for a driver.
Yeah, but I think like that to get the conversation in the right direction as we're starting to get this in-game data. Like what you really need to know is, does that hitter struggle with up? But like what kind of up? I'm thinking from the hitter's perspective. And also as a pitcher, I want to know, does the hitter struggle with, am I throwing a backspin kid to her? It's like, maybe not. She's going to freaking hammer that. But I have this hard bullet kid who's going to be a lot more successful against this staff. Those are two different things. But if we label them right now, and the data is the same thing, like and all we can access is like the labels and we can't separate it by the spin profile. I think that's tricky. So I think from a like top level, you need some consensus.
I think we just call them different things. I could see a world, definitely if we're going to now say that it's called a curve when it does this. I think you got to keep them separate. I think like the tradition of softball is rooted in like drop, rise, curve, screw, change, whatever, off speed. And I think what it really needs to be is like, it's bullet, sink, glove side, arm side, up, rise. I mean, unfortunately, that one won't have to say the same, but like that's it. It's glove side, arm side, sink this, and like then I think that's it.
It could be the labels we have, right? Which is rise, drop, curve, screw, and then we need a bullet, bagel, right? And then I think you would probably name the off-speed ones, like in the direction we've been going, off-speed rise, off-speed drop, right? Like, knuckle or bullet, off-speed, whatever it is, off-speed bagel. And then, and I think probably what you're going to find is, interestingly, that we might get more labels than we're used to using right now, because you might start having a horizontal with down.
I could see a world
like the sweeper,
where it's
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the like drop curve is interesting.
Right.
That's a wildly different pitch than
Yeah.
the drop that has no horizontal. It's
Right.
wildly different.
Yeah.
So I think there's worlds like that. But I think of like, I can just see a world where we're like that, a good drop ball is 8 inches, just throwing some stuff out there, is 8 inches. And then you get the coaches that see it's 0 and they're like, oh, that's bad because it's called drop. Whereas, so it's like, what we're saying is
You're
like,
but
it's
they have a
okay.
bagel. They have
They've got a bagel.
Bagel's good.
But that's not going to happen. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think it's better off if you say a good amount of sink is X.
Right.
I think when you're trying to get people to change
Yeah.
the label
tricky, though.
conversation, I can't see that happening anytime soon, if ever.
But it does help the younger conversation too, though, if you can get to that place, which is like
It simplifies.
not chasing all these things, and let's see what I don't know how you get there, but this idea of like, it is the labels we have. It's not like we're like, oh my god, we've really missed the mark with these labels. Those are what pitches do, but we just don't use them
There's no consensus.
correctly. And then when it doesn't match the label, instead of saying you thought you had a curve and you have a bagel and bagels are good, so we're not gonna, and thinking about curve helps you, so whatever, but let's understand what you actually do. Instead of saying that, we're like, oh my god, you thought you had a curve and you don't, like, let's all freak out. Like that's not what we're talking about.
That
So
actually happens a
I
lot
think
with
that's
curves. People are like, oh, she was like so freaked out. She listed her best pitch as curve, and the curve
that
has no
yanked across
horizontal.
freaking bagel. People love that. It works.
Or it doesn't, it's a down pitch, but it doesn't have any horizontal. And I'll say there's no horizontal break there. And I'm like, isn't that great? Because obviously she listed it as her most effective pitch, but that means that's
you
not,
can throw it inside.
you can also throw your best pitch to the other half of the plate. So I'm like, isn't that great? And the coaches are like, that was really hard for her to hear. I'm like, no, that's not how we meant it. I actually meant like,
We
I
just
think
had a
that
kid
tool
in-house
is
that
more
had a
versatile.
curve that has a curve that had like -8, -9. And it opened up that she can throw it on both sides of the plate. And the kid is like taking off just from understanding that she throws the curve to multiple places. It's a drop ball. That's fine. Cool. Whatever. It goes to, she can think about whatever she needs to think about. So I think, but
The
in
exception
terms of
to
then,
all
if
of
I had
this-
in-game data of her, it should say drop ball. Because
The idea is that like, just because something is not doing what you think it is doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah. Yep.
The exception, the like, well, that's not that good, is if everything you throw
Everything's a bagel.
it's not that good.
it's not even everything's a bagel. That'd be better than like nothing is hitting
slow
any
bagel.
threshold.
It's a slow
Like
bagel.
nothing is hitting any threshold of like, it's not significant in down, it's not significant in up,
Right.
it's not
You
significant
have
horizontal.
7 pitches and they're all 3
They
down
all
with 3
sit-
horizontal.
That's the jack of all trade, master of none. That's what we talked about last week with a lot of freshmen come in because the youth level is so stuck on labels and where they get angled that the balls they're not significant in break anywhere in any direction. And there's just 100 of them labeled like that. That's the like, no, don't go for that. That's what we talked about last episode. So if you didn't listen to that, you should listen to that, everyone out there. And then there's a whole nother world, assuming you're not in that, which like, okay, I don't know how many debriefs they've done so far. More than half probably at this point, right? So 80, 90 or something, I don't know. And I think like 3 people have come up where they've got nothing. They're in the world where we talked about yesterday. Maybe not 3, but the overwhelming minority of them are in that world. And so I think that's important to differentiate, is like, just because someone tells you the pitch is not doing what you thought it was or what you thought it was supposed to do because of its name doesn't mean bad. It's just this opportunity, as you're saying, Krista, to understand it a little bit better and maybe maximize it, maybe leverage it a little bit more now that you know what it's really doing,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I think my last comment, and then we have a question. I think my other prevailing thought is like, man, at the youth level, if we could really like hammer this out and help kids to identify what they truly have, we might be able to get to some of these workload challenges, that we know are coming up through the youth game that are going to limit the
When you
pool at
warm up
colleges.
if you warm up all those
Right.
pitches.
What did we
just
say
like,
last week? Do less better. Like if you go from 9 pitch types to 4, all of a sudden you're taking less warm up reps. There's less things to concentrate on, and you can leverage what you do really well. And maybe there's room in there for some addressing of the workload conversation with the youth kids. That would require them to know what they throw, which is another tricky conversation.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I'm going to stop there. We could go on for this forever probably, but I'm going to...
Saving the world, one pitch label at a time.
Yes, definitely. All right. Going to play our question. Here we go.
Hi, Krista. Mine is not really a question. It's really a discussion on what your thoughts are about live hitting with the pitchers during the week. How much is too often with trying to get the hitters live at bats and having the pitchers kind of see where they're at?
Right. We talked
Thanks,
about this one.
Liz.
Yeah, that was Liz Jagielski, head coach of DePaul. She didn't say it. I thought she was going to, so I didn't do any intro for her, which was super rude.
Just assuming everyone in the country knows who she is. Yeah.
Liz Jagielski has been a good friend of ours for a long time, and she played at DePaul, coached there a while ago, and now has come back as the head coach at DePaul University in Chicago here. So, yes, that was her question. This is something I feel like we talk about a lot with different, I think, colleges as they're like coming back, what live looks like in high school season, what live should look like. So Ashley, you can start.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an easy one because a lot of the like consulting calls, in addition to like, okay, now that we know what pitchers are doing, what they throw, let's talk about what warm-ups they need, what plyo protocol they need. And then the very next discussion is like, what should their week look like based on this? And I would say it's 1 to 2 times for all pitchers, essentially. If we're not talking about this kid has arm pain, just came back from ramp up, let's get rid of like the outliers, the exceptions to the rule. But generally, a pitcher is relatively healthy and they're in the normal mix. It's 1 to 2 times because I think the reality is coaches really do need, like, this is their time to see, especially like Liz is coming from a university, obviously in Chicago, where the time outside is really limited. Even when you get back, like this is the time to be able to see. They want to see how things are translating. If you're a new coach, you need to see how your athletes are competing. Like there's a real world where you've got to see them compete. And then there's this recognition that like this is also the off season still, where like it's the only time to develop something. Like we're not the recommendations I'm giving now to like, let's see if we can go after X. Let's use this training strategy to go for Y. We're not talking about that in January. And we're not going to give them something brand new to do on their own on December 3rd. So like it's now's the time we have to do that. So it's a split. So I think it depends if the coach is like a really like in Liz's circumstance, she's new, she wants to see it. And she's like, I need to see them twice. I'm like, got it. Now there are sometimes athletes where I'm like, there is nothing to see here. She has nothing. I've had those conversations and I'm like, do you want her to throw live at all? Is it important? Sometimes it's 0 to 1 because it's like, this kid needs the bullpen. She needs to stay in and off. There's nothing to work for right now. And so there's that standpoint, but I think it's at most it's 2. Most people are throwing about 4 days a week. I do not think 5 is smart. Not this time of year. So most pitchers at this time of year, it's all dependent on time of year. So this is being recorded in September 26th, we're saying this, but it is the concept of usually about 50-50 at max, 2 and 2. And then down if your pitcher is, if there's some discomfort.
Injuries needs to develop. A lot.
There's just the tools are not there. So it's like, what are we going for? Those types of things that we got to pull back on. But that's what I would say. And it can be done differently. I have, I came up with a consulting call last week with a coach where we laid out their workout 1, their workout 2, workout 3, it was live hitters, but not like defense scrimmage. And then workout 4 is a scrimmage, like real defense, where there's just like the adrenaline's different. Like it's not quite an opponent, but it's something. And each week we decide the pitcher's plan. She's doing 2 workout 1s, 1 workout 2, and a workout X. Like we tell them each week what they're doing of those 4 based on what she saw. So if she can modify that week by week based on the athlete. But no one's throwing more than twice. That's like the max. And usually it's like not even scrimmage. Usually it's like a live day in between. So hopefully that answers it. But
what
that's
about
how I've been laying it out?
What about, I would say you answered that with like kind of a high level approach in mind, which is, if I'm throwing twice a week, like what volume during those are we talking about?
Volume in live?
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine they'd be throwing. I think the absolute max would be 1 time through a lineup is basically like 1 to 1.5 times through a lineup. You might be testing, but like, are you right now? Probably not. Like I would say, like 3 innings worth, right? Which is like generally. So I think when you're probably starting to get at like 50 to 60, that is the absolute max at high intensity right now that you
Mhm.
probably should be pushing per outing. There's so many exceptions to this. There's so much individuality, but if you generally want to know, I'd say stay in the 30 to 50 full intensity pitches when they get there. I think that's a comfort zone. Do you have athletes that can do more than that? Yes. Are they going to need to throw more than that in a handful of months? Yes. But right now in September, I think that's a pretty safe bet, 30 to 50, give or take.
Yeah, I would say that's from a hitter's standpoint, that's plenty. And I think you're really like what you laid out is kind of similar to probably this time of year of how I would approach hitting, which is this balance. One, they can just in the same way that pitchers would use their plyos to warm up for that, which also is going to help patterns. And it's also going to do that. The hitters should be using whatever drill set you sort of decided to warm up for live. So it gives them the opportunity to have that always at the base of that. But then I think it's very similar, which is you're going to have two sort of development days, that for hitting will go into machine most likely, or, a manager or something that you have that throws full arm circles. So they might even get up to kind of live-like intensity in those this time of year. And then two live off the 2 days. They could get 2 days.
Hitters. Like there's an element I answered from the question of pitchers because obviously, that's where my brain operates. But like I answered from how to like put the pitchers plan as top priority. If it's about seeing your hitters, I mean, staffs at this point are plentiful. So I mean, even if you only have 4 or 5, but every pitcher is throwing 30 to 40 pitches,
once
that
a
is
day.
plenty.
Right.
Like we're
Right.
it's not, you don't need, and I would really suggest mimicking no matter what time of year, mimic what's real. Like do not have a pitcher in there where it's like, oh, you're going to throw to 8 hitters and it's
For an
8
hour
consecutive
straight.
hitters.
Right.
It's like, like if she gets 3 outs, she switches,
Right.
or there's
I would
a
also-
break and then you hit defense and it's like a change. If you're like only one pitcher's throwing, then there's a break for 5 to 7 minutes where now someone comes in, a coach comes in and hits and it's just defense. Like things like that. Don't just crush her beyond what the game actually asks of her.
I was going to say, be thoughtful pairing up your weight room time too on those days. If you're going to go live, if you're going to have a scrimmage, if you're going to have that, you have your pitchers, your staff throw 30 to 50 high intensity pitches in a arguably 110 plus environment with adrenaline. I think thinking what they've done in the weight room that day, what their lift is supposed to look like, talking with your strength and conditioning coach on bringing the lift down that day for them. Don't skip it. It's an in-season approach. Don't skip the lift. They need it, but it needs to not be in an intensity that it's going to crush and fatigue them. And now you've put them in a higher intensity situation in a scrimmage and live, and you're looking for something out of them. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm exhausted. I just got crushed in the weight room, whatever, an hour before this morning. I think be thoughtful of that too, of just how you're setting them up for success on that day and making sure that it is as real as it can be. They wouldn't lift that hard on an actual game day. I think being thoughtful of that too.
Yeah, well, it's why the summer becomes so important and
Totally.
the conversation around what summer looks like, because we see that this is probably another trend we could talk about, because I have seen this a lot of like how crushed everyone is from their lifts right now, and I just think like that sucks. Like I'm not sure
Doesn't have
that's
to be that
really
way.
what it should be, and I just am not sure that's really what it like. There's
like
an
the
element
college
of,
athletes.
yeah, like there's an element of like they're coming back to school and they're getting into routine, and like that's
Right.
there's some of that you're not gonna get rid of, but like this idea of like the lifts being very off-season minded right now, while
Mhm.
that's actually not fully what we're in. We're like sort of in off-season, but we're getting into preseason.
No, yeah, it's a
and-
hybrid.
Yeah,
It's like
and so
this fall is definitely at all levels, even the youth level,
Right.
because there's like, I have tournaments every
Right.
weekend starting and whatever.
Right.
I'm like, of course you do. So it's like, it's this combination. It's a mini off season meets preseason meets in season. I mean, that's really what it is. No, you're right.
Right.
The off
It's
season
like-
time is past.
it's like you have to have in-season mindset of what you're doing in training to be prepped to be able to play games or scrimmage or whatever, but an off-season mentality in the sense that like we're not trying to be at peak performance right now. So when we're not doing that, we're developing and we're going for that. That's very much what we talk to like our high schoolers about, which is depending on what stage they are in high school and things like that. It's like, okay, we want to make sure your volume is matching, so you're not going to go get hurt on the weekends. But let's also remember what we're like focusing on in training. We need this time to keep developing. And I think right now, Laura, I think it's a great point to get into that concept, because it does seem like there's a little bit of a mismatch in this time period for what the weight room looks like. It's in some weight rooms and how the athletes seem to be responding. It almost feels like they're taking like a June weight room approach, and it's like it's not June anymore. If they didn't do that,
that ship sailed.
yeah, and
That ship sailed
that's like
3 months ago.
a separate. That's a separate
Like
conversation.
if I'm a
that the
coach
athletes need to have.
and my kids have debilitating soreness that they can't perform in their skill, I'm going red flag because
Yeah.
either that's in the programming, like what are we doing that we are destroying our
Or
kids?
the
that
athlete came not ready.
Either
or
way.
the athlete can't ready. Like I'm not trying to point fingers here, but like there's a red flag there. Like the skill is the game. And so
Right.
strength and conditioning is to make the skill, enhance the skill, not, like keep them from being able to compete and perform. Now, could there be just like program changes? There's some added
Right,
soreness,
some-
a
right,
single
here and
week.
there,
Like I'm not
right.
talking about that, but like debilitating, then I think of like, I still think this is a whole nother episode and we want James on for this. But the
Yes.
way that every skill department, area of expertise is rooted in some traditional trains of thought. You better believe so is strength and conditioning. And there's a lot going on out there, not just at the college level, of course, also at the private level, that is about like strength and conditioning being about excess, like more, instead of understanding its role to support the skill. And that's a whole
That's
nother
why I say,
topic.
like,
but I definitely think that goes on.
You don't
Yeah.
you don't need fitness tests in August to tell you if your kids are ready. Figure out how are they sore coming out of the weight room? Is the programming right and they're sore? Then they weren't prepared. End of story.
Right. Well, and
You
that's
don't need
just,
a
and then
fitness
that's a
test so they can get
conversation.
hurt.
That the punishment is the punishment, and I think this is to this point of live. If like our goal right now is we need you throwing 2 days live because that's our way that we're going to see where you are and our
Right.
hitters are going to be prepped and all of that. But you're too sore coming out of the lifts.
You're not
I've already
ready.
talked to the strength coach, and it's not it's not their fault. The program looks good. It's you didn't prep this summer. You don't get to throw live because you can't hurt you.
pushed back your availability then, right? If you
Right.
can't be available in the fall, you can't work on the
Right.
things you want to work on. You can't manage your workload to
Right.
understand what your body needs. Then your ability to be used in the spring becomes so limited because your coaches
Right.
haven't seen you. So like you can't start your off season in August. That ship has sailed. It sailed
Yep.
starting in June, and
I don't even know what this podcast is about anymore. It's about everything. All
freaking
the
awesome.
Yeah,
we're
we
just
cover a lot of things.
saving the whole world. I'm putting a cape on.
Dropping
the next
F word
episode.
today. We're going wild today. So
We're gonna replace.
Yeah.
All right.
We're gonna replace Oppo Taco with when a bagel pitch gets hit for a home run. It's called a toasted bagel.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh my
Quote me on
God.
that
Did you
one.
just come up with that right this
Hell
second?
yeah. Quote me on that one. We gotta give Ashley Rogers credit for the label of bagel though. That was hers for 100%. That was
Yeah.
hers. Toasted bagel.
Wow. Damn.
Jokes, man. I
That's
got jokes.
really good. And not that I'm like surprised you came up with such a good one, but just like on the spot. Having traveled
I actually
this
thought of it
morning.
20 minutes ago, but there was never a point.
What
where-
happened to you in Happy Valley? Jeez.
I'm running on pure adrenaline and caffeine after a 7
Okay.
a.m. Eastern flight this morning from the Eastern.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll wrap it on that note. On the
Yes,
bagel
please do,
note.
because
Can't
I don't
top
know.
it.
We think we can
can't top it.
tackle all the topics. Like, let's now
Yeah.
get into, jeez.
All right.
Wrap it
Well, until next week. And next week, we will be done traveling when we talk, and Ashley will be on her way. So we won't celebrate until the
Nope.
debriefs are done because we have been yelled at in the past, but we will be done traveling next week. when
We aren't done until
so,
Ashley's done.
Yes. Until.
Let's say assessments are over. And I'm always like, are they? Everyone?
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. I'm kidding. But not. That's usually what yeah.
All right. Well, until
good, we're
next
good.
week. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.